Mystery of the Mummies. About 50 kilometers north of the capital city of the Republic of Ukraine there is a famous tomb with hundreds of mummies, but strange because the mummies are preserved in a very simple condition. Natural, not in the pyramids. The mystery has no answer about the mummies. Next to the fierce river is a rugged mountain range. Ancient people dig deep underground tunnels and scattered along the mountains. At one stage, the upper part of the tunnel was cut deep into the ground to set up a coffin, and it was the resting place of the deceased. Called a coffin, but no national planks, but a frame and grid rectangular pyramid or dome, but through the mesh can see very clearly the deceased face. At times, the coffin has a recessed wooden chunk and the grid placed directly above, like a bed. All the beds here are beautifully decorated. Going to the tomb house feels cool. All the corpses here are the same dry black and brown. Strange is not even a little bit of the smell of death, even to the smell of mold does not have. Kids on the way across the grave often throw their books on the ground and run down the grave to play chase as if this is a fun place for them. Sometimes there are people who visit the deceased as their ancestors. It is said that in the pyramids of Egypt there are strange phenomena. For example, in a tower of a metal coil, about a month later, it shone like a new one. Fresh milk from a cow if the outside of the tower is broken, but in the tower is still normal with the same time. Fruits and vegetables to leave in the tower for about 15 days are still fresh, not withered. 2 tomatoes planted at the same time, the tree in the flower tree results in front of the outdoor tree. But that is the air inside the Great Pyramid. Great architectural works in terms of culture, money, human power. Construction time as well as the existence and in particular is supposed to absorb some cosmic waves through the gates and vents towards the north, thus creating an environment capable of preserving the bodies of the pharaohs for thousands of years. And here it is clearly not the pyramid, but just a grave dug up in the earth with a very rustic, but the corpses here have existed for thousands of years. What made the corpse everlasting with time? Due mummification? Due to environmental retention? Or because of both? These are big questions that after decades of searching are still not completely correct answers. At present, there are various ways of embalming, and assuming that the pioneers in this field in particular and medicine in general are ancient Egyptians. Many papyrus medical records show that the ancient Egyptians knew quite well about the human body. They consider the death of the dead, but the soul is immortal. In every human being there is a silhouette that resembles that of a human being when he looks at the mirror, called a soul, ka, when the soul enters the body, when the soul departs from the body but remains. The soul only dies when the body is destroyed. If the body is complete, the soul will enter the body someday and the person will rise again. This belief is reflected in the mythology of the god Osiris and god Seth. The mummification was born and is believed to have originated in the Old Kingdom, around 3000 to 2200 BC. The mummified man uses a hook to put his nose down on his head to get his brain down, and then cleanse his skull with a kind of water rich in aromatic herbs and wine. The chest and abdomen are operated with very sharp knives to remove all the organs, only the heart remains in the chest because the heart is considered the birthplace of intelligence and love should be kept waiting for the final judgment. The chest cavity, the abdomen is filled with perfume and alcohol and then sewn. The body is soaked in salt water for about 70 days, so it shrinks only to the skin of the bones. Then it is rubbed with aromatic oil and a special solution is then tightened with cloth, while the chest, abdomen also stuffed with perfume smudge. Another researcher said that after the brain and viscera the body is buried or placed in a windless cave for about 70 days, then wrapped in plastic cloth. The fingers are inserted into the gold bag to avoid falling. The coffin, stone, people carve the face of the deceased person, body to touch the clothes to easily recognize his body, so look at the coffin there are people without legs, next to the tomb also erect statue of dead stone or wood. At the beginning, mummification was an impenitent sacrament of the king and queen. From about 1500 BC, the new nobility was allowed to use this funeral. Then this practice spread to the rich and the lower classes. However, in this custom also distinguish the class, king of the king, using the most sophisticated marble techniques, after the nobility and the rich. Of course, pay a large sum of money, while the ordinary people do not have to pay, but the simplest mash technique with alkaline solution, and plastering a lime outside. In 1996, El-Baiti discovered about 10,000 mummies dating back 300 BC to 300 BC. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo is currently displaying the 26 pharaoh mummies about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, but the condition of the bodies is still very good. Recently, Japanese archaeologists unearthed an intact mummy in an undisclosed tomb in Namibia, Egypt. Sakugi Zamora, a leading researcher at the University of Oaxaca in Tokyo, said the body was marinated before the pharaoh Tutankhamun, 1336 to 1327 BC. The Ukrainians and Europe have their own way of mummification or learning of the Egyptians? This question is still not answered satisfactorily. But people are inclined to the second hypothesis of ancient times, Eastern and Western, with two brilliant civilizations that have been exchanged. Phoenicians, now Lebanon, have been trading throughout the Mediterranean since the 11th century BC, to the 6th century BC. The ancient Greek scientist Ptolemy traveled to Egypt, Mesopotamia. 5th century BC Greek historian Herodot traveled to many places in the east. Late in the 4th century BC, Alexander Macedonia conquered the east, as far north as India. Called the Hellenistic period, 334 to 30 BC, and formed the Hellenic countries, including Egypt. At times Egypt was just the Roman province. The Middle Ages, European recession should be backward than the East in all aspects. The Arab state was founded in the 7th century, and in the 8th century it became a vast empire stretching across Asia, Europe, and Africa. From the Indus Basin to Spain, and as a bridge between Indian, Chinese and Western European civilizations, the study and exchange of scientific achievements, including mummification, weak. From the 11th to 13th centuries, Western Europeans had 8 expeditions by the Horsemen of the Cross. Crusades are another bridge to East-West civilization. However, in ancient Russia there was a way of mummification completely different from the traditional method used by scientists. Doctors Vyvodtsev use chemicals such as glycerin, phenic acid, alcohol and camphor. So far, this method has only discovered a mummy is the famous Russian surgeon N.I. Pirogov. The surgical mummy has survived for 124 years and is barely preserved in the crypt of a small church in the suburbs of Vinksina, though his face and hands are open in the air but the color is almost unchanged. Especially the organs of Pirogov remain in the body. However, it is not yet known what percentage of the substances that Dr. Vyvodtsev has made into the marinade solution and how to treat it, as well as the methods of body protection that he used. In Vietnam, many people know 2 statues bordered at Do, Thuong Tin, Ha Te. It is a mummification in the normal air environment that is subject to frequent and long-term effects of temperature and humidity, which is the hardest storage condition. These mummified statues can be found in Tibet, Japan, and Vietnam, usually the remains of the monks. In 2005, when unearthed in the field of digging Nha Tan, Hanoi has a mummified body but remains intact after 10 days exposed by rain and sunshine. Although the plate has been broken, the water has entered the coffin, but the mummification of our way about 200 years still dry, intact internal organs, bearded hair, clothes, blankets, cloths still remain white. Especially from these shrouds of fragrant and long-lasting. Vietnamese archaeologists have documented 75 mummy tombs but no excavation conditions yet. They said it the way to mummify is often used in China and Vietnam is the method of immersion into the marinated solution and also in the anaerobic environment, without air. The core of this marinade is to make the body an aseptic environment. When the mummified person is dying, he or she is given a positive dose, mainly cinnamon, to slow down the body temperature for a period of time after death and to limit intestinal bacteria. At the end of breathing we'll pour about a liter of glutinous rice into the mouth to kill the gastrointestinal tract. It is thought that alcohol works to keep body tissue from decomposing. The deceased is bathed in flavored water to kill bacteria on the skin, then dressed in aromatherapy, shrouded in several layers of silk to avoid air impact and import very quickly. The vestiges must be sealed very tightly and painted in the outside so that the air in the jacket is the lowest. In the coffin of the tomb of Nhatan, a blackish blue fluid is said to be marinated. This marmalade often uses the essential oils that today know as pine, eucalyptus, and long-lasting fragrances. These findings have confirmed that the ancient Vietnamese have mastered the technique of mummification perfectly and delicate. Unfortunately, scientists have yet to find evidence of the origins and secrets of Vietnamese mummification. Natural mummies from forensic perspective. In the city of Guanajuato, Mexico has a graveyard that holds 117 dry dead bodies as marinated, the corpse about 140 years from us. These bodies were never marinated and buried normally. But because the climate here is very dry and there are so many minerals in the soil, the buried remains do not decay but shrink and are very solid. The people took this place to bury people who do not want to return sand dust. This phenomenon can be fully explained by the hot dry climate. The soil is rich in minerals is the environment where bacteria cannot work. So the body did not decompose but gradually dried up. Forensic scientists refer to these cases as mummification. However, in tropical monsoon climate with high temperature and humidity like Vietnam, there are still many corpses after 3 years of common burial or longer still intact software that people commonly call the litter link. And this phenomenon is attributed to the incorrect meaning of superstition. When the dead are buried in the traditional way, if the temperature, the environment is favorable, the bacteria available in the body, the soil will grow very quickly and the software of the body is the source of nutrients. Think of them growing. Where more water is buried, the faster the software is destined. However, if the burial site contains many sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, manganese, sulfate. In addition to disinfecting the soil, these ions penetrate the body and bind to glycerin. The fatty acids that break down from the fats into soaps are called saponification. Most bodies have this phenomenon, but because of the small amount of soap, it is not enough to stop the bacteria from decomposing, ultimately leaving only the hardware. A small number of strong saponins all make the body an effective sterile environment. The skin is yellow, hard to cut, unpleasant smell. The role of software decomposition is very essential and only bacteria can do no meaning. So after 3 years, the death of the deceased was still intact. Similarly, in the limestone mountains there is the phenomenon of rock that the main role is calcium and sulfate ions. If buried in a high place, hot body also decomposes very slowly. The forensic examiner sees the value of preserving the injuries and pathologies in these specimens for calculating whether to excavate a case investigation. And people explain the phenomenon with their superstition.